Well, good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you find yourself. We're so thrilled to have you here. My name is Matt Nash. For those of you who don't know me, I am the Managing Director for Social Innovation at Duke's Innovation and Entrepreneurship Initiative. I'm also an adjunct professor of the practice at the Sanford School of Public Policy. And I'm thrilled to welcome you here this evening or wherever time zone you find yourself in on behalf of colleagues here at Duke, but also our partners at UNICEF and the U.S. Fund for UNICEF. And I'd like to welcome you to our virtual forum on social innovation, which is a week of inspiring programming celebrating social innovation. And in particular, the theme of our week and many of our events is menstrual health and hygiene, which is the theme of our first cohort of innovators. Take a moment to introduce yourself in the chat box if you want. Give your name, if you're a student, the name and program, maybe graduation year. Just introduce yourself so we can see who we have here. And then as the panel gets going, I'm going to encourage you to use the Q&A box to enter questions in for our panelists. So feel free to introduce yourself in chat, use Q&A for questions. Let me first just tell you a little bit about what we're up to here. So the Duke-UNICEF Innovation Accelerator launched in late 2019 with a call for scalable innovations in menstrual health and hygiene, particularly in East Africa. And in collaboration with UNICEF, the Water Sanitation Hygiene Team, and the UNICEF country offices in Burundi, Kenya, and Tanzania, we've selected 6 social enterprises to participate in the first cohort of the Accelerator. And over the last 7 or 8 months, we've been working with them through webinars, through coaching sessions, mentoring, really helping them build their capacity to scale their impact. And so this week, we have a whole variety of events that we're calling our virtual forum on social innovation. It's really meant to be a celebration of this community and to welcome new faces into the fold. We're so glad to have so many students here with us tonight to learn a bit about careers in international development. So before I kind of introduce our panel and we kick off our session, I want to say that I want to encourage you to look at some of our other sessions going on this week. For example, tomorrow night at 6 o'clock, we'll feature a conversation with Duke alumna and social entrepreneur Sahani Jalota, who is the founder of the Minna Mahila Foundation, which builds women's networks, employs women, and improves menstrual health and hygiene in India. She launched that venture while she was a senior at Duke and a participant in the Melissa and Doug Entrepreneurs Program. So we're thrilled to have her join us tomorrow at 6 o'clock. And on Friday at 10:30 a.m. Eastern, we are going to have a panel session focusing on girls-centered design and social innovation, which we're going to feature 3 of our social innovators from our accelerator. And that panel is going to be moderated by our friends at UNICEF. So we hope you'll join us. You can see a link there. You can go to dukeunicef.org/get involved, and you'll see a link to register for those sessions. It's a great opportunity to learn from innovators and other practitioners in the field. So for tonight, we're really thrilled to bring you a panel on international development careers that we feature a esteemed panel of practitioners, including some alumni and some friends of Duke. And before I introduce the panelists briefly, I want to give you a reminder that we're going to have a few questions that I'll ask and work to moderate the panel through, but we really want to encourage your questions. So feel free to use that Q&A feature on Zoom to ask those questions. We'll answer some as we go, and then we'll reserve some time at the end. Now, we especially hope that some of you here are eager to learn more about careers and international development. For many students, this is a career field that's not well known. And so we want to use tonight to kind of illuminate that. Now, I myself had an amazing opportunity after college through the Peace Corps, working with NGOs in Eastern Europe, and that kind of, for me, just touched the rest of my career. I find myself working in international development in a variety of approaches. Even now in my work at Duke, I try to incorporate that very heavily into my teaching and programming. The last accelerator, which we led, which was called the Social Entrepreneurship Accelerator at Duke, was funded by USAID's Higher Education Solutions Network, which one of our panelists, Takora Jones, was actually the leader of. And when that program launched, President Obama himself said he hoped that those programs, those partnerships between USAID at Duke and the other universities would really help to inspire students to learn about and pursue careers in international development. And so similarly, through our partnership with UNICEF, we're really hoping that this program also inspires students to look at careers in these fields, whether it's health, whether it's economic development, food security, democracy and governance, so many other fields. Really want you to see this as a career field that may be not well known at Duke, but we have some amazing alumni and friends kind of out around the world having real impact. So that's our task for tonight, is kind of explore this field and help you see about the variety of career opportunities that we have. So let me very briefly introduce our panelists, and I'll have them give themselves a more proper introduction as they kind of describe their own career. So we're really thrilled to welcome four amazing practitioners with us tonight, or this morning or afternoon, wherever you are. So first, Dr. Takora Jones, who is the director of the Center for Development Research at USAID. And as I mentioned, she was formerly chief of the USAID Higher Education Solutions Network. We have Michelle Kirby, who is a Fuqua alumna, who is currently an independent consultant, but she was the chief program officer at MyAgro and the program manager at One Acre Fund. These are both very well-respected organizations that are very innovative in the field of agriculture and economic development. We also have here with us tonight an alum from the Masters in International Development Policy program, Muyatwa Sitali, who is a program specialist at USAID, focused on, at UNICEF, my apologies, Sitali, who's focused on country engagement in water, sanitation, and hygiene at UNICEF. He was previously at World Bank in Oxfam. And interestingly, he's currently an advisory board member of the Duke-UNC Rotary Peace Center. And finally, Wendy Taylor, who's an alumna of Trinity, who's currently the vice president for technical leadership and innovation at JPIGO, but it was formerly at the Rockefeller Foundation. And I first met her when she was the founding director of the Center for Accelerating Innovation and Impact in the Global Health Bureau at USAID, where we were able to collaborate with Wendy and some of her team in our previous Accelerator. And currently, she's also, I believe, still on the board of advisors of the Duke Global Health Institute. So for those of you who are joining us from the Duke Global Health Institute, you'll know that's an amazing nexus of opportunities and learning here at Duke for students who are interested in global health. So what I'd like to do is turn it over to each of our panelists, and I'll go in that order I just mentioned, and have each panelist give you a brief introduction to themselves, a little bit more about their current or perhaps a recent job, and tell you about the kind of work that they do. And then I'll pass you with a few other questions that kind of give you a kind of what it's like in a week or a month in those careers. How did they get to that current career, their pathway, how do they prepare for it? And I'm going to kind of conclude my questions with their thoughts on how COVID is affecting international development and how that might have implications for those of you who might want to explore careers. So let's jump right into it. And Takora, if you don't mind, why don't we start with you? Maybe tell us a little bit more about you and the work that you do.
Thank you, Matt. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I really appreciate the invitation and the opportunity. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may happen to be. As Matt said, my name is Takora Jones, and I'm currently the Center Director for the Center for Development Research within the U.S. Global Development Lab at USAID, which is a lot of things to say. But what that currently means in the world that I live in is that I am focused on how to support the expansion of research and research utilization within USAID for the programs that we serve. Now, USAID is a very complicated organization, and I'm sure Wendy will tell you about her time there. She was within the Global Health Bureau, and I will not say any more than that. I will leave her to describing that more robustly. But I ended up joining the agency in 2009 after having done a congressional fellowship that was designed to take PhDs and bring them into government. So by way of background, I'm actually tied to North Carolina. I'm currently sitting in my childhood bedroom right now because on March 12th, my daughter and I left Washington, D.C., and we've been in North Carolina with my parents ever since. So if you see a small child pop up, that's the 2.5-year-old. She makes her special guest appearances at any moment of any time, but this is the world that we live in and will continue to live in for the foreseeable future. So I actually am a graduate of the North Carolina School of Science and Math, if any of you are familiar with that, and then went to MIT as an undergraduate, finished in 2000, actually took a year off and worked in Washington, D.C. at a middle school, but as part of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, and then went to graduate school at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, where I studied polymer science and engineering. Now you may think, what does any of that have to do with international development? And I will say to you, nothing. Except that the ability to do research, work within a complex research environment, and appreciate the complexities of living in spaces that exist outside of the academic environment were really part of how I kind of progressed within my academic career. So September 11th, 2001 was my first kind of week of graduate school. And that radically altered how I saw my role within the world and the place that science sat within it. To me, science was part of a larger ecosystem. It was a marriage of science and society and not just one standing outside itself. So I stayed and finished the degree in polymer science and engineering, but then I actually went to a weapons lab out in Livermore, out in Livermore, California, the Lawrence Livermore National Lab. And again, what does weapons have to do with international development? Nothing. But it was an exposure to international development in a fundamentally different way. What's unique about the experiences that each of you are having right now is that the world of international development is a bit more known to you than it was when I was a student. And when I was finishing my PhD and finishing the postdoc, I knew I wanted to be able to engage in again, the marriage between science and society. But at that point, the path that I saw to that was initially through moving into the congressional spaces and the congressional sphere. And so when I applied for what was the Materials Research Society's congressional program, which is open to people who have finished PhDs in a wide variety of fields that are associated with materials, but there's lots of these different kinds of fellowships, and I'm happy to take more questions on those in particular as we progress. I was lucky enough to be chosen and then moved into working on the Hill, which is a very DC, very kind of unique experience. And to have been a Black woman in science, it is the whitest place I have ever worked in my life, which I have no problem saying because that is accurate. And what it taught me was a couple of things, both that working at the 100,000 foot level of how the world functions, you know, at that point in 2008, the financial crisis was in play, and we were looking at, much like they are looking at or sort of not looking at now, passing another relief bill. We were essentially looking at how we could engage and support society as it was recovering from the shocks and stresses of the 2008 financial crisis. But you're writing memos that are one page as you're highlighting like one thing in one bill that is $787 billion. That's billion with a B. And that dwarfs in comparison to what is needed now around COVID. But at that moment, I was like, I need to get a little further under the hood. I need to go a little bit deeper because this very, very high level is fascinating and interesting, but I want to go deeper, and I want to be able to support programs and, you know, support the real intersection where the rubber meets the road for science and society. So I reapplied for what is the AAAS, American Association for the Advancement of Science, Science Technology Policy Fellowships again, and ended up in the Diplomacy, Security, and Development section and interviewed for this job, where I ended up being late because the person who was supposed to be escorting me didn't know where they were going. I sat down. It was the most intense interview I had had in my life. And I got up and was like, I have no idea what this job is, but I want it. It was fascinating. It was about coordinating. It was about catalyzing. It was about, you know, still being at the very beginning of the last administration and the enthusiasm that was there. And so I took it, despite also having offers from the climate office that just at that point was impressed that I had worked on the Hill and just thought, oh, okay, you would be down to roll with we have a bag packed in our office and we get on a plane at any moment. And I'm like, you're not listening to me when I'm saying I am interested in program management and program development. So that's another story for another time about, you know, as you're interviewing with people, thinking about what they are telling you and how they are treating you and if they are actually listening to you or not. Very important. But ended up at USAID starting in 2009, when the first administrator for the last administration, Raj Shah, started his work. Like I got there just before he did. And he was very interested in expanding kind of the purview of how we supported science and technology within the agency. And then ultimately how we could catalyze work at the intersections of the really critical places that we operate. You know, the more traditional things that you think about in global development are, you know, global health or agriculture or econ or environment, but where does digital fit? Where does supporting research capacity fit? Where do those kinds of interstitial pieces around social entrepreneurship fit? And that really is what the ethos we were operating within as we built out our activities within the organization that kind of was the predecessor to the one that I now lead was operating within. So I said a lot. I'm happy to entertain questions. Matt, did I cover all the things that you wanted me to cover?
That's great. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. I appreciate that. Okay. We'll come back to you and ask you a little bit more about the kind of work that you're doing now. But
I gave you trajectory and not what my day is like, but we'll get there. So
that's great. Fantastic. Thanks so much, Decorah. How about Michelle? Can you tell us a little bit about your trajectory of a career? Tell us a little bit more what you've done recently and how you got there.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Decorah, for kicking us off, and thanks, Matt, and everyone for hosting. Happy to be here. So I'm Michelle Kirby. I'm a graduate from Fuqua 2016, and currently doing a bit of independent consulting in between full-time jobs. And I can talk more about that as a stepping stone path in careers. Most recently, I served as the Chief Program Officer at MyAgro, which is an agricultural social enterprise working mostly in West Africa. We're in Senegal, Mali, and Tanzania. How did I definitely will echo a bit of what Decorah was saying of like international development wasn't necessarily like a term that I knew or a career path that I knew was available when I was an undergrad. So my path definitely was partly discovering that as a path. I went to Bates College up in Lewiston, Maine, so like very small liberal arts college, and studied Francophone cultural studies, which essentially was just a fancy French major where you got to focus on a Francophone region. So I was focused on and did study abroad in Morocco. And that was definitely one of my first exposure to a longer term period in a developing country. And we did a lot of hands-on experiential learning and field-based research. So I spent a lot of time up in the Atlas Mountains interviewing Tamazight education systems. And that was definitely like started the bug, right? Of, I love French and I love like just speaking languages and using that to connect with cultures, and then applying it to this kind of work was something that I was really interested in. I think I thought languages, you could be like a teacher, a translator, an interpreter, and I didn't want to be any of those. So what else could I do with the skill? So from Bates College, I ended up moving down to DC. I worked at a place called the Microcredit Summit Campaign for 3 years. They're an NGO that's working to support stakeholders in the microcredit field. This is a field that I didn't know what microcredit was when I joined it. I was definitely looking for more like foreign policy and like bookings and things like that, and kind of stumbled sideways into this because they needed someone who was Francophone. So I got to essentially run a couple of conferences for them, be a French-speaking contact person, and learn a bunch about international development and microcredit and financial services for the poor through that first entry-level job, which was really great. I really wanted to get back abroad after really enjoying that experience in Morocco. So after a few years with Microcredit Summit Campaign, I got a job with the One Acre Fund out in Rwanda. So this is another agriculture social enterprise. They take microcredit, but apply it in kind to selling fertilizer and seed to smallholder farmers, and do that on a loan to farmers. So they pay it back using a microcredit small group guaranteed loan model. So I got to be on the small startup team there. I was like the fourth hire at the management level in Rwanda when we were serving about 2,700 farmers, and got to see them grow to 47,000 farmers, and managed finance and human resources, as well as a little bit of marketing, a little bit of training, a little bit of wearing all of the hats as one does at a startup. I loved like the experience, but I felt like I was reinventing the wheel a little bit. Like I didn't know how to do accounting, and yet I was directing the finances for the organization in Rwanda. And so instead of reinventing the wheel and learning on the job, I thought, let me just pause, go back and get some of the credentials and study some of the best practices, and then apply those again to international development. So that led me to well, to Fuqua. So definitely very attracted by the focus on social entrepreneurship and impact investing and just the social impact ethos of the school. And spent 2 great years there, kept my fingers in consulting throughout those 2 years to stay in the field. My husband did a 1-year MBA, so I continued to kind of cobble together consulting while he was out doing his MBA. And that led me to a consulting project with Myagro, which turned into a full-time job as a country director for Senegal, which I did for 3 years before being the chief program officer for a 1.5 years or so. So very similar to One Acre Fund, it's another agricultural social enterprise working more on a micro savings instead of a microcredit this time, and serving a different territory in West Africa instead of East Africa. Yeah, and then I can definitely talk a lot more about what the day-to-day of a CPO looks like, and I'm fresh in the job search, so I'm also happy to talk a lot more about what the career search looks like. But very happy to be here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michelle, for sharing that. And to draw a little thread through this in an interesting way, when Michelle first got to Fuqua, before classes even began, she introduced herself and asked how she could help. So she actually helped us with the proposal for the Social Entrepreneurship Accelerator Duke that Sakura's program funded, and then allowed us to work with Wendy at the Global Health Bureau at the Center for Accelerating Innovation and Impact. So there's a little thread. The 3 of you probably don't realize that thread running through this panel. So
what this should tell anybody is, like, be careful, the world is small, all of those things.
That's right. This is so true. This is so true. Well, let me take a moment and thank you, and let's move on to Sitali. Sitali, tell us a little bit about, before we kind of jump into the day-to-day of your UNICEF work, tell us a little bit about your career trajectory, how you've ended up in this position at UNICEF, and how you passed through other opportunities on the way.
Well, great. Thank you so much, Matt. Good afternoon, good evening, everyone. And it's really a great pleasure to join you tonight. I feel bad that I'm the only one not in that thread, and I don't know what I can do to get into that thread. It was really an exciting thread. So I am Zambian by nationality, and I sort of trace back my interest in international development just basically by where I was born and the kind of childhood that I had. I grew up on a farm in the rural outskirts of Lusaka, and we were doing quite well, but then one thing after the other, just the usual development challenges. We didn't have transport to get our goods to the market. We had animals, but then we weren't able to find market for the milk. So then we couldn't keep the animals. So we sold most of the animals until we remained with one cow, which we could keep for some time, but then it wasn't making sense. And then we had to let go of that cow. And there was just this was back in the 80s. So you can see from my gray hair that I'm quite an old man. But so some of those initial experiences, it motivated me into thinking, it should not be this way for a long time. I do not want my child to grow up in a circumstance where life is this hard, where you have to make choices between buying soap or salt. Why not both? And so when I had the chance after high school, I had the opportunity to work for. It was an international campaign, the Jubilee movement. You might have heard of that campaign. Maybe you haven't. But that movement, that campaign was very much focused on campaigning for the cancellation of public debt that governments owed, the poor governments owed to the rich government. So there was quite a lot of countries that owed huge sums of money to the IMF, to the World Bank. They owed this money to a group of creditors called the Paris Club, and they were failing to pay back that money. They were paying more, in fact, in debt service than they were putting money in health, in education, in agriculture, and put those things combined. Some countries were still paying a lot more per year in debt service than they were investing in their national development. So this opportunity came to work with the local Jubilee movement in Zambia called Jubilee Zambia. And it was a very interesting time because this was the time when most of the countries were really working on their poverty reduction strategies, basically looking at finding ways to really tighten their budgets, but also focus a lot more on poverty reduction within their government. And so there were some consultations in Zambia about that I participated in. And one thing led to the other. I met some people, and this is one thing I want to mention. So I met some people at some conferences, and eventually I sent my CV to somebody I met in Nairobi, and I basically just asked if they could give me comments on my resume. And I also said, well, if you think I have sufficient experience to get into international career, I would be happy to look at that. So she didn't respond, but what I got 2 weeks later was a phone call from a guy calling from Senegal, and he's asking if we can do the interview, schedule the interview on a Friday. And I didn't know what the job was about. I didn't know what he was talking about. I just said yes. And so I went for the interview, and then this was for a job in Liberia. And I knew anyway there was a civil conflict in Liberia in the 90s, but I hadn't heard much beyond that. And one thing led to the other. I got the job, and then I moved to Liberia. And so this was in water, sanitation, and hygiene. My job there was communications and advocacy on water, sanitation, and hygiene, with really a big task of the government had a huge budget for water and sanitation, but they were putting very, very little into that budget. So for example, the department which was responsible for environmental and occupational health, its annual budget was $25,000 at the time I was there. $25,000 for the department that's responsible for ensuring everybody washes their hands, and that all workplaces have got everything that they need. So the advocacy goal was to work with the government so that they could increase the funding, but also work with the other donors so they could put in more money into water and sanitation. So I did that job for 2 years, very, very fulfilling. I think because also the context was very challenging. So you could see changes in a relatively, if you worked hard on something, you could see the contribution that you're making, and advocacy is really hard. So within those 2 years and about 8 months, it was quite an exciting 2 years and 3 months. So anyway, I moved from there to Senegal. So Michelle, hearing you worked in Senegal, that was exciting. But my job in Senegal was regional. So I lived in Senegal, but actually did nothing about Senegal itself. I was working with Ghana, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso, and that covered education, covered healthcare, covered water and sanitation. And one interesting aspect was some work we were doing in Ghana, where they were trying to get more into sort of this private the insurance schemes for healthcare, and looking at that as a path to universal health access, and seeing the debate in the US, and it's just some interesting similarities there about which way do you go when you're actually designing public policy, especially for health, which is really very important. So I worked with that number of countries from Senegal, and then eventually came the opportunity to come to Duke. And after Duke, while I was at Duke, in fact, I got my internship between the 2 years was with the World Bank. And so that was more like a consultancy with the World Bank to do some research in Niger and Liberia, looking at aid effectiveness. So how are donors and governments working together to put the money they have and turn it into results really effectively. So that internship, I sort of hung on to that work. I finished the work with the internship, but I kept those contacts. I kept sort of checking in on what they were doing, the conferences they were having. I attended one conference they were doing in Geneva I think it was in November, so in between the semester. But that kept the contacts, and eventually I then moved to the bank at the end of the program in Duke. It was a consulting contract, so very exciting, but not very stable in terms of just the future. And then the opportunity came to move to UNICEF, which was then to work in a partnership in UNICEF, a partnership called Sanitation and Water for All. So that partnership is hosted by UNICEF. I work in the secretariat. As of today, I head the country engagement team. We've got 68 governments that are involved. We have a team of about 6 people, 5 of which work directly with the countries, and I'm responsible for putting that work together, working with them to sort of strategize on how we can help countries to move the needle, rather bend the arc of history towards more equitable services for everyone. That's water, sanitation, and hygiene services. And that's what brings me to this point. Thank you.
Yeah, fantastic, Satalik. Thank you for sharing that journey with us. I think we're seeing how each person's journey has been quite unique in unexpected ways. So let's let Wendy talk about her journey. Wendy, how did you get to the work you're doing today, and what path did you follow?
Well, I'm probably older than all of the panelists, Satali, even with the gray hair you mentioned. So, and you guys see when I graduated, so which is not fair, but so you can do the math. But so I won't give you the whole story, but I'll give you a few highlights. I'll start off by saying this, and I always say this when I talk to students. So reminding of what I was like back then. I was one of those students that was the planner. I had the 5-year plan. I knew what my next step was going to be, and that next step was intended to get me to the next step. So it was always several steps ahead. So I was sure that I could just plan out this whole trajectory. And I will just tell you right off the bat that for me, with all the best planning, I ended up having this just completely fascinating sort of winding path that I never could have designed, but it was as if a lot of these interests of mine by accident just somehow all came together in this sort of perfect fit. So in retrospect, by design, it was just beautifully woven a path, but yes, I never could have orchestrated it. So I will say that, you know, I am a Duke grad, proud Duke grad, and I actually came in and I'll give you a few of these threads that I eventually wove together. I came in pre-med, I was going to do medical research. I got killed on some of the science classes, and I sort of rejected the path that my father wanted me to go on, and I ended up finding public policy, fell in love with public policy. I was part of the Sanford School before it was even called the Sanford School, and ended up following that policy path. I worked on the Hill, I went to graduate school, got a master's of public policy from the Kennedy School, and went and worked at OMB, which was really the kind of seat of power in the US government and the gatekeeper for everything. It was this great heady place to be as a young person right out of graduate school, and telling the FDA commissioner no, he couldn't do certain things. But I really, I was on more of a domestic poverty focus, and dealing with welfare and really trying to ameliorate conditions of poverty. And then I found my roots back into the science and love of infectious diseases. And so I made this big career change while at OMB, going into public health. And there was actually a little thread where I kind of fell in love with Africa at Duke as well. And it was, I think I finally decided after a good 7 years at OMB to leave government. I was moving up the ladder and getting too far away from the things I loved, and ended up, I really at that point wanted to go work in global health, and I couldn't figure out, it didn't seem like a viable path for me. I was a brand new mom, and I just wasn't sure how those two meshed in my mind at the time. And I didn't know a whole lot about global health and what the path might look like. So I ended up falling into the more of a biotech space, and I loved the science. And it was through that I ended up launching a nonprofit, which completely threw me off my trajectory, because I was planning on a career of public service, and was not prepared to be an entrepreneur, and was really regretted not having paid attention to all those how to run a nonprofit classes in graduate school, the Kennedy School, but found my way and found that I caught that entrepreneurial bug and really loved it. And so the nonprofit was figuring out how to engage biotech companies and develop medicines for diseases of the developing world. And so that was where I learned, so much from being an entrepreneur, from running a startup, raising funds, and really even that global health space. And one of the things I loved about global health is it really brought in, all these different disciplines. It was the science, it was the business, and the understanding markets, and it was the health, and it was really this great blend, which for me is really the secret to a lot of future success in global health. And then I ended up, there was one other skip, I ended up getting an invitation to come join the Obama administration, and it was early on in that, as when he came in, and I couldn't say no. It was just a little bit after Takora, and I was brought in basically to head up public-private partnerships, innovative finance, and innovation in global health. And my job description really wasn't anything beyond that. It was kind of created in this new administration. And it was there that I was able to just do so many cool things, best job ever. I created a Center for Innovation and Impact, which was really designed to catalyze new innovations in global health for tough unsolved challenges, but also figure out how to scale them. And so just built a whole team from scratch, and we ran grand challenges. We worked with Matt and folks at Duke to try to figure out how to scale some of those innovations. A whole market access team where we worked on building out our capabilities around market shaping and innovative finance, and really planning for product introduction. So, and I convinced people to come from the private sector to join our little startup. So actually, I feel like that was really my second startup, even though it happened to be an innovation. It was a center within a big, gigantic bureaucracy. But for me, it was a startup. I ran it like a startup, and I think that was part of why we ended up being really successful. So I was there for most of the Obama administration. I was political appointee, so I got kicked out at the very bitter end, and I did a 2-year stint as a Rockefeller Fellow, Rockefeller Foundation Fellow. Got to dive into AI and really thinking about how we can apply advances in AI, machine learning, data science, data analytics, and global health, to come up with a plan to modernize our global epidemic intelligence systems. I'm now going on too long. Anyway, it was a good year before our pandemic hit, when I was rolling out our recommendations on that. And then now I'm at one of the sort of mid-size international NGOs, and I'm heading up technical leadership and innovation, and it is a bigger organization. I'm comfortable in these entrepreneurial spaces where you build and grow things, and I've got a team of 70, and we're supporting 40 different countries and working across almost every area of global health. And but I'll just tell you one piece. This maybe verges into what the day job looks like, but it is really an interesting time for international NGOs, and it's a transitional time, and so we will get into some of these conversations about what that actually looks like. But it's a point where all of these international NGOs have to sort of rethink sort of who they are in a changing landscape where the funding's changing, and some different pressure. So for me, it was very interesting and an exciting time to try to kind of figure out that sort of uncharted path, the same as you do with a startup, and kind of figure out where to go. And so I'm sort of bring some of that thinking and the innovative experience that I have, and bring that to this new this old 40-year-old organization, and help it continue to evolve. So that's where I am.
Thanks so much, Wendy. Both a tale of social entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship, innovating within larger institutions. So appreciate you narrating that tale. Tell you what, given the interest in jumping to students' questions soon, let me ask one other question, and then we'll get to some of the questions we're seeing pop up in the thread. I'm curious, and kind of maybe drawing on what you were just starting to hint at, Wendy. I wonder if anybody has any thoughts on how COVID, in particular, but other major trends too, perhaps, are affecting careers or in the future are likely to affect these opportunities or the field in general that might therefore have an implication for students. So anyone want to share any trend that you see or how COVID in particular may be affecting this field and therefore what the implications are for students who might be interested in careers? We might like to start, any of our panelists?
I can start quickly.
Yeah.
I think, the bigger challenge that we have is because international development is international. Being able to actually travel and engage and do so many different other things is being significantly hampered by COVID broadly. I do know that our colleagues who are foreign service officers within USAID are just now starting a very, very slow return to post. And so in terms of the broader international development field and how people are staffing their organizations and how they are engaging, each organization is taking on a very kind of individualized approach to how they want to manage risk. And so for anyone that is willing to go into this field, how you are managing your personal risk is going to be kind of part of that calculus. But we also have people who are starting to work remotely from wherever. And so, the willingness for people to work completely off time zone and, all sorts of other things as they start to figure out how best to collect things is essentially part of how the world will continue to proceed forward, because the likelihood that people will get very, very comfortable with large gatherings and all of these other different things, like if Facebook is like, yeah, no gatherings until 2021, 2022, as well as some of the other large companies are operating in that way, one would expect that many other organizations, universities, big, small, all of those are taking a wide variety of approaches. And so, yeah, that's my long and short version of what's happening as it relates specifically to federal government employment.
Yeah, thanks, Sikora. Others?
I could just add to that and say that, one of the things is interesting is really thinking about where's the direction post COVID? What does the recovery look like? I certainly think, we learned after Ebola, it really revealed how fragile and underdeveloped our health systems were in certain parts of the world. I think we've seen that same thing in the United States and our own frailties and our own health system in a lot of ways. But I think there will be new funding. So we're even looking at global health security as a viable funding stream in a few years ahead. I think global health as a whole is not likely to take any big hits. I mean, the worry is that the COVID starts to crowd out other investments, but for the most part, I think it's enjoyed bipartisan support. So if anything, I'm really hopeful that there will be an increase in funding. That the bigger issue is that a lot of this work is shifting into in country, more money going directly to ministries of health. More money going directly to local organizations. So anyone thinking about the career, certainly I think in global health, but maybe in development, that there's a big shift happening, and it's worth really understanding that and where those opportunities might be, because that is where it might start to, these big INGOs are not going away anytime soon, but they are downsizing. So understanding some of those shifts, even independent of COVID, I think are going to be really important.
Very insightful, Wendy. Thank you. And I imagine, Michelle, you're facing this right now because you are kind of actively looking at a time when the industry is going through this shock. Have you any lessons you've learned as you're actively looking for opportunities right now?
Sure. Yeah, I won't repeat anything that Wendy and Sikora have already mentioned, maybe new points. There's definitely, I feel like my watchwords this whole year have been patience and persistence with the job search. I think patience in particular because a lot of the NGOs or social enterprises that I'm looking at have dealt with budget freezes, hiring freezes, concerns about their fundraising opportunities for the next year. And one of the easiest things is just to pause in new hires. So that's there. What I have found as kind of, I mentioned using consulting as kind of a stepping stone. I am not a full-time freelance consultant. I think that the approach to doing that would be very different. But what I have done is using kind of ad hoc opportunistic consulting projects in between full-time jobs. And I think that during COVID in particular, there's a lot of receptivity to that. So I've been doing conversations with different organizations that I'm interested in, and then feeling out what are their needs right now, because a lot of folks can't make commitments to a full-time hire right now, but a short-term project is possible. And that's a really great way to, well, show your work sample essentially, and then be on their radar for future full-time hires.
Yeah, really excellent point, Michelle, which I think is a good takeaway for students too. If there are opportunities to do short-term, projects and stuff that could be helpful in the long run. How about Satali? What are you seeing? Are you seeing implications of COVID and other trends?
Yes, so I think that the first thing is just what Wendy mentioned, which is just how vulnerable we are because of how connected we are. So COVID has really pointed out those vulnerabilities. We are connected, we will remain connected. Our commerce demands that, our global community requires that. So that will remain for some time. And I think that that also means that there will be substantial focus for a considerable time in global public health and making sure that big institutions really deliver on a public good in terms of research knowledge and just being at the forefront of that. So I think that that's where perhaps most of the thinking will go in public health, in preventing or managing pandemics, because we're guaranteed to have another one. We just don't know when. We just don't know what's going to cause it. So I think that will be there for some time. But there are inevitable winners and losers. And I think that most leaders, I just did a blog about sort of asking us not to forget about things that really matter. They might look small, but I think most leaders at the moment will be looking more into revitalizing the economy. And that might even come at some choices they make, which might be at the detriment of things that actually matter the most to us, because those things might seem not to be very important when you have to make these decisions of revitalizing the economy and what we're calling in SWA, building forward better. So we think that economic agenda will focus on jobs. But there are things that contribute to jobs which might be neglected, but they should not be neglected. I work in water and sanitation. We've just been looking also a little bit at how does this sector contribute to jobs. You'll find it's connected to a lot of things. In the US, they say there are about 212 specific types of occupations that link to water and sanitation and hygiene. And in India, they had a program which brought about nearly 8 million jobs over a period of 4 to 5 years. So how do you link the specific sector that you're in with this big agenda on jobs and the economy? I think that would be a key thing that everybody will have to do while governments sort of pick winners and losers in this new context. Thank you.
Very interesting. And actually, go ahead, Wendy, you want to follow up on that?
I was just going to say, can I just add one thing to build off of that, which has been really interesting, is our organization, which is all, has worked in global health exclusively for 40 years, just with COVID, ended up, we're Baltimore based, and ended up jumping in, or really was asked to come into the city of Baltimore and do all the training, the contact tracing training, and build up a whole cadre of contact tracers but pulling out of the sort of unemployed communities. And the link I was going to make to this last one is that it is as much of a COVID response approach as it is a building up the workforce of the future and trying to create jobs for for individuals out of work in some of the communities most affected, and it's actually funded by Rockefeller. But it's this really interesting linkage of both the jobs and workforce development as well as COVID response. And I don't know if that's a sort of a path for the future, but it's it's really a creative way of bringing a few of these threads together.
Very interesting. Well, let me turn to a few of the questions we're seeing in the Q&A are related to, some students have noted the pivots that many of you made in your career. And so I to summarize and synthesize a few of these questions, are there advice that you could give for students who are looking to get into this field, whether they're looking to break into it and they don't have the international experience, or maybe they're looking to reposition themselves from a one sector to another? As you look back, and if you were students today, knowing what you know now, any insights you might be able to share for students who are looking to pursue careers in this field? Who'd like to begin? Go for it, Michelle.
I can jump in. I'm thinking back to like my very first couple of jobs, and I think that knowing what your hard skill set is really important. So you've got the passion, you've got maybe some of the academic background, maybe not, right? But what is the hard skill that you're bringing? Because if you think about this is, like lots of small businesses, small organizations, small folks doing project management, and like all the same skills that you need in any business apply to doing that. It's just that it's being applied to water, health and sanitation, agriculture, nutrition, whatever it is, right? So it's great if you like have a PhD in nutrition, great, but like what other hard skills are you bringing, especially if you're entry level, right? Or just trying to crack into it. So for instance, I talked about being Francophone, like having French skills being one differentiator. Another that I didn't mention, I actually did theater all throughout high school and college, just as like a hobby, just something fun that I did. And I was the director of the student theater group and ran a bunch of different productions. And it turns out that running like stage management and putting on theater productions is very similar to event management. So when I went into this conference planning organization that needed someone Francophone that happened to be applying this all to the microcredit field, what they saw was an event manager who spoke French. And what I saw was something cool and international, right? And so you have to find those skills and the needs that meet, and then applying it to something that you're interested in. So
nice way to bring those different things together and position yourself. Any other panelists have thoughts? Takora?
That is fantastic. The event manager who speaks French. I realized over the course of the early stages of my USAID life that I've been doing event planning since I was in first grade. I planned my teacher's surprise party and like coordinated all the other first graders and like got us together for what we were supposed to do. And it was really, I need to talk to my mother and see if this was actually a surprise. But like in my head, this is the story that I tell myself, that I started event planning as a first grader. And I've always enjoyed doing that. And so much of what international development ends up being is looking at how you are coordinating and building community. And event planning is a little bit of that. And then how you are building partnerships. And I'm sure Wendy can speak more to like the specifics of like how you are constructing partnerships. But so much of the work that we do is very relational. Like as a scientist, people are just like, but you used to do chemistry. Why are you doing this now? I'm like, because I like keeping people from being combustible as opposed to chemicals from being combustible. And so being able to look at systems and think about how they interact with one another. I ended up on the what we called Fin board, or the financial board, as an undergraduate. And I like money and understanding how money flows and what that means for systems and opportunity and power and all these other different things. I wouldn't have said those things in that way as a college student, but I can say them now. And that's part of why I was like, I want to understand how Congress works, because that's where the money comes from. It's power of the purse. And it's where kind of the ideas come from. And then there are people who take bits and pieces of that or create their own and engage. But so much of that is about systems and people and relationships and like understanding the underlying mechanics of things. And so that is what I would add to Michelle's like, French event plan. Like you just, as a student, you're not fully appreciating the soft skills that you are building right now through your extracurricular activities, because it's likely been pounded into your head that the technical work that you're doing is the highest and most supreme. Guess what? If you don't know how to play with people, all the technical work that you do, like no one cares. Like they care, but no one cares.
Can I add just a couple other pieces to that? So one is I would say also, and I saw there's public policy majors in there. Public policy are great skills to have. I walked out of Duke with skills that I put to work right away, and certainly anything in Washington, those skills are, I can't tell you how valuable they are, and you will put them to use immediately. The second thing is, if you're still in, whether you're undergrad, graduate school, get as many internships as you can just to try things out. It gets you the foot in the door and starts building the network, and build that network as deeply as you can, because you will use it and rely on it. And then the third thing I would say is think beyond the traditional pathways, because I think international development, the field as a whole, kind of the traditional development is changing, and there are ways to achieve the same ends, if whether you're focused on global health, you're focused on agriculture, others, that the pathways through private markets and still having an impact on the populations you care about are so much greater than they used to be. The social entrepreneurship, which some of you look at that and might be excited about that pathway. So there's so many different routes to go, and so cast your net wide and explore, because many paths might lead you to perhaps where you ultimately want to go. There's and all of the experience I think would be really helpful.
Thank you so much, Wendy, for that insight. I couldn't agree more. And Satali, do you want to share as well?
So maybe I could just say two things. One, I cannot agree more about networking. In fact, all the jobs that I have had were very much linked to people that knew my work. And so there was merit that they had when they saw the application. Let me put it that way. I see it more often than usual. That this is very crucial. Now, I think the challenge for today is, how do you network in a world where you cannot meet people in person? So I think that's our homework tonight: how to network via Zoom with people that you are not able to shake their hands and not able to see if they are nodding or not when you're saying things. So I don't know what the answer to that question is. Maybe to help recruitments to sort of regularize them, but I think it's the challenge of today. The second thing I wanted to mention is opportunities come in various ways. Some come big, some come small. I'll just say, whatever you find to do, do it very well. Execution, action is much better sometimes than ideas. It can be more supreme than a good idea. If you can actually do it very well, people see the results. And ideas, yes, that's great. And we all sort of can come up with ideas. And I'm not saying don't bring new ideas, but just also focus on the execution and do it timely. In the partnership that I work with, I know my manager, for example, is very, very much looking for action. And if we work with somebody within the first day or two, you are able to tell if this is going to be a doer or if this is going to be a lamentations process all the time. So I would just say, think how you balance those things very well, and reach out as well to people who can help create the connections.
Thank you so much, Satali. Let me add a few more points. I know we've reached our time. Just a few other quick thoughts for students. Look for opportunities for multidisciplinarity, where you're working across majors and disciplines. So think about certificates like the Global Health Certificate or the Innovation and Entrepreneurship Certificate or the Civic Engagement and Social Change Certificate, where you can engage with students from other disciplines and in courses from other disciplines. Think about experiences. Wendy mentioned internships at Duke. We've got Duke Engage, where you could spend the summer in the field, around the world or across the US, but also co-curricular experiences like some of the project-based clubs out there where you can work on a project or a consulting style project like Duke Impact Investing Group, Design for America, Engineers for International Development, even classes out there. Like I have a spring class called the Social Innovation Practicum where we work with social entrepreneurs. So build those project-based skills. We need to learn the informational interviewing in the age of Zoom, I think, and then look for opportunities for inspiration, finding alums and practitioners, professionals like those you've met here, reaching out, doing an informational interview, learning about the field, I think are all ways to start to explore. And with that, I'm sorry we've reached our time. We were just really starting to have a great conversation. We've reached our hour, so really appreciate those of you who were able to join us. Let's give a special appreciation for our panelists this evening. So to Wendy and Michelle and Takora and Satali, really appreciate your time here. Those of you who are here this evening, we'll send a follow-up and maybe a few other career resources that we could share. And I'll invite the panelists, if you have any other recommendations or suggestions for things to read, websites to watch, if you can share those with us over the next few days, what we'll do is we'll send an email out to all who participate here who could take that away. So thank you so much, Wendy, Takora, Satali, and Michelle. Really appreciate you being here tonight.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. Good luck to everybody. It's a great career path. So excited to see the variety of students and backgrounds interested in this topic. So
good luck with everything during this virtual time. Take care of yourselves.
Yes, thank you so much and all the best.
Thanks so much, everybody. Have a great evening.
You
Take
too.
care. Thanks for joining us. Join us for some other events and learn a little bit more about international development and social innovation and menstrual health and hygiene. Have a great night.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Good night.